This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
And also each individual is different. And back to the point, again, neurodivergence is just a trait. It doesn't define us. So it cannot be suddenly that gives us a superpower in a way. And any trait goes with its strengths and challenges.
Neurodivergence. What a big word. But it is one that comes with the simple promise of progress. The concept springs from this idea of neurodiversity, recognizing that brains may be wired differently between different people, causing perceptible differences in information processing, prioritization, and social relations, among other aspects of life that permeate both the personal and work spheres. Today, we'll talk about why there is an emerging consciousness of neurodivergence and what is needed to support those with neurodivergent conditions to fulfill their potential in all they aspire towards. Hello, I'm Tay Hong Yi, and you're listening to Headstart on Record, the show that gives a head start in your personal finance and career. We have two guests today that each have their own unique experiences with neurodivergence. Our first guest is a recruiter with almost a decade's experience hiring in a major search firm, who brings both his knowledge on employer trends and his personal experience with neurodivergence as someone diagnosed with dyslexia. He is Mr. Rumi Mohd, Associate Director for Sales and Marketing Hiring at Randstad Singapore. Our other guest is a seasoned finance professional at a top financial institution who was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD for short, only as an adult. Mr. Himanshu Chowdhury is now a board member of Unlocking ADHD, an awareness network for those with the condition as well as their family members. And now, I've said two guests here have their own brush with neurodivergence. There's a third in the room, myself. The subject matter of this episode hits especially close to home for me, as I was also diagnosed with ADHD, and quite a severe case of it, as an adult, about a year after I started working here. So, this promises to be an exciting show where I have more to contribute to the issue than perhaps other episodes. And so, without further ado, I would like to just welcome both Himanshu and Rumi to the show. So I would like to just find out, how did both of you find out about your respective conditions?
Thanks, Hong Yi. Thanks for the introduction. I'll dive straight into it, right? At a young age of probably 7 or 8 years old in primary school, so I was from Henry Park. And what happened was, typically like a young boy, I just didn't like to do my homework. I had super bad handwriting, and I used to complain of headaches during when I was reading too much. For my parents, they always thought it's a way for me to be mischievous and escape, the work. But then my form teacher at that time actually told both my parents that, hey, he has seen a similar type of situation with his previous students. And he suggested to them that I should go to the Dyslexic Association of Singapore. So, fast forward, my parents did brought me there. And in primary 2, I met a psychologist. I remember it was quite a lengthy test, about 3 to 4 hours. And at the end of the test, they were like, hey, look, you're dyslexia. I didn't think too much at that time. For me, it was just like an extra CCA. After school, I used to go there and probably had an hour, 2 hours of lessons, probably 2 times a week or 3 times a week. That's basically how I found out about it. Yeah.
How about you, Himanshu?
Yeah, so mine was interesting in the sense that I've lived my entire life with this. And I also grew up dyslexic. It just wasn't diagnosed until very late in life. And by the time I started trying to figure out some of my conditions, and this is at the age of 37, I was struggling a lot at work. And like many corporate workplaces, my employer had an employee assistance program. And I was sitting on it. I knew about it to say, maybe I need to speak to someone. And then after one struggling weekend at work, I decided I really need to make that call. So on that following Monday, I called up that hotline and they immediately set me up to see a psychologist. And, everyone has this idea from pop culture of what it is to sit on a psychologist or a shrink's couch. And then I had this anxiety as well. I'm going to talk to a stranger about my deepest, darkest secrets and all of this. But the interesting thing was, because they're a professional, they immediately put me at ease. And as I started talking about my struggles and so on, my childhood challenges and everything, they said, this looks like ADHD. It looks like you grew up dyslexic and so on as well. Why don't we just talk a little bit more about it? We can consider a formal diagnosis. So that's what led to then later on seeing a psychiatrist as well for a formal diagnosis and kind of set me on a journey for that. So to me, had the employee assistance program or had some immediate support not been there, I don't know if I would have made that immediate jump because I was hesitant about it. I'm very glad I did, yeah.
Yes, and you mentioned there was a particularly trying weekend that really pushed you to make that jump. So this actually leads into my next question, which also is open to the both of you. How did your respective conditions affect you and in terms of achieving the goals you wanted to in the workplace? Because sometimes there's this disconnect, right? You're motivated to do something, you know you want to do something, and you know it's good for you and you know how to do it, but then for some reason, there's, it just doesn't translate up there between the ears, right?
Yeah, so I think this knowing how to do it and not being able to do it, if you think about it, everyone struggles with these kind of things. It's not unique to say you have a particular condition and as a result you're struggling, but it definitely is exasperated. It is quite toll on people with ADHD who have somewhat of a dopamine dysfunction, which kind of stops you or just doesn't let you get started on tasks, which is a big challenge. So for me, it has always been a challenge in terms of getting things done. And that has impacted my confidence growing up. Having said that, there's all these other strengths and so on as well. So you make do in life. But that particular weekend is very symptomatic. But in general, a lot of life struggle had been like this. On that particular weekend, I had to do like a set of slides. Normal PowerPoint slides that take maybe 2 hours to do. I spent my Friday at work. I went back to office on a Saturday. I didn't do it. I found every excuse under the sun to file my expenses and so on. I went back on a Sunday and I'm like wondering, what am I doing? I have 2 young kids at home and I'm spending all these hours and I still can't do that 2 hours worth of work just because it's due on Monday. So I'm trying to really push for it. By hook or by crook, that work got done. But this was just like, there's a dissonance in me to say, I know I can do this. Why can't I do it? It's not the first time this is happening. So those kind of struggles have been very common throughout the life. So that affects your confidence. So that's the first part. And I think secondly, in the way it has impacted me always is kind of leads to an internal, not just from a confidence perspective, but an internal dialogue where I may beat up myself to say, you're not capable or, internal dialogue for anybody here. The words we use is not the kind of words we can use on a podcast easily. So that used to be a struggle as well. That is how it affected me throughout. That diagnosis itself didn't change that. It helped, in fact. But the struggles throughout the life, those have been along those lines.
How about for you, Rumi?
Maybe I take a step back, right? I think because when I was a kid and it was, given to me, it was diagnosed. It was a bit challenging, to be honest, at the start because I was always at the back of the class. My exam papers were in A3 size. The MCQ was the font was probably double or triple. And people see you differently. I mean, we're all kids at, primary 1, primary 2, all the way to primary 6. But, kids being kids, we still played a lot during after recess, after school. So no issues on that. I think at the start, I was getting used to it. I think for work-wise, I would classify it as more of an invisible struggle. Because I think, we all can agree, we all look the same. It's more on, hey, sometimes people don't know what you're going through. For dyslexic, at least for me, things that I probably need to, similar, right? I went through like PowerPoint slides or, reading or long proposals or emails that might take 1 to 2 hours. I might need additional time, maybe 3-4 hours. I think Randstad, where I work at, it's, we do have the flexibility. So, sometimes at times I do ask my direct manager if I can just stay at home, work from home and just complete all my tasks. So that really helped. Another thing I use, I think everybody here would know, is also now with the help of ChatGPT. It really helps my grammar and vocab. So that really, helped a lot in terms of, saving me and being more efficient in time. Yeah. So I think outcome is there. Outcome driven is just at times, I just need a lot more time at the start at least. Yeah.
And so I like that we're starting to touch on all these like mechanisms and routines and, kind of, as well as in the case of Himanshu, specific incidents. Perhaps I would like to jump in with my own specific experience, actually. So I think there was a turning point. I identified very strongly with what you said, Himanshu, in terms of, that specific weekend, a very bad weekend or something. So it was my last year at university, like by some quirk of the course administration, like I was taking a kind of freshman level course that I needed to clock before I could graduate. And I was doing it in my final semester. And I was like, I'll just it would just be a breeze. And I was like, okay, I have a topic for an essay, a simple essay by the standards of what I've already done by then. And I had like 10 clear days because it's the final semester, and this was something that I would probably take at most half a day to do. And I put it off, found every reason to put it off until 90 minutes before submission. And I was like, okay, this is a disaster. And I'd like to touch now on, in terms of employers, because I think we've brought in, through our own experiences as well, the employer aspect of it. And both when you're talking about the assistance scheme, as well as you, Rumi, about, the support that Randstad has. So I think from both your experiences, I'd love to hear from both of you in terms of what can employers do to meaningfully help neurodivergent team members fulfill their potential. And has this support improved over the years you've seen? Because both of you have been in the workforce for quite some time.
Yeah, so in my corporate job at OCBC, I definitely see some of these support structures playing a big role in the workplace. And I mentioned employee assistance program. At the same time, there's recent initiative to appoint and train something called wellness champions, people who can have essentially an empathetic ear to listen to fellow employees and serve as like signposts to seeking help. And there's many initiatives like this, wellness talks and so on as well, which is what we do also at Unlocking ADHD. But if I look at the industry, I'm very hopeful because I see a trend that firstly, the stigma that is around in general around neurodivergence or being different continues to go down. We're not there as yet, but clearly we're better off than, let's say, 10 years ago. And we will be better off 10 years later, for sure. But this trend is very positive. And through some of my work at Unlocking ADHD, we regularly engage various corporates or industry bodies in terms of advocacy and also other organizations. I can see the interest in wanting to engage us. That's going down just in like our 3-year journey with Unlocking ADHD. So that trend is very positive. Now, back to employers, what employers can do, apart from the support programs they have at work. Another thing that I think is very helpful, which you increasingly see, is leaders stepping up and sharing their personal stories about their own struggles or maybe as a caregiver, but openly talking about mental health challenges, conditions, or struggle. And that also sets a very positive mood. The employer itself could be part of industry initiatives. For example, there's SG Enable, which allows hiring, facilitates as agencies hiring of differently abled people. My employer, OCBC, also is one of the registered companies. I think the program is called Open Door Program. And there's other industry bodies. I know there's Grow Well Leaders, there's Mind Forward Alliance. So when the company is part of these, right, it creates a positive branding to say, okay, I belong here. I will be accepted in this kind of an organization. So I see a positive trend with the employers being part of such initiatives. And as a result, the employees feel good as well. So these are all very positive things that I see as a trend that continues to be better.
Yeah. Fully agree, Himanshu, right? I think at even similar to OCBC Randstad, we also partnered previously in last year. Sir Richard Branson, well-known dyslexic, he opened up a global charity Meet by Dyslexic, and Randstad sponsored one of the online papers that went up to his online university. So I think I fully agree, if the employers is showing the right foot forward, then people be more, they feel more welcome and feel more, at home, if they do have neurodivergence. So I think that's one. Another thing I think from my story, I can share is that, when I interviewed at my current firm 8 years ago, my HR director, part of the interview process, there was a psych test. And, one part of the psych test was very, I guess there's a time constraint. And I typically don't really do well in that, right? So part of it was I did it the night before and, my HR director is Claire Smart. She's in New Zealand now. But essentially the next day when I met Claire, I came forward, right? I said, hey, Claire, by the way, one part of the section, apologies in advance, I don't think I did well. And in fact, I shared with her I was dyslexic. And then she went on, say, Rumi, hey, let's speak more about your personality test and, things like that. So I think education is something that employers can, go ahead and learn. And, part of the L&D team or HR team and emotional support, right? Throughout the process, in my last 8 years, there's a lot of emotional support from all my colleagues and the higher ups to just ask me, how am I doing? Is there anything they can do? So I think, them being there really helped a lot.
And this touches on actually the next point I want to talk about in terms of disclosure. Would either of you recommend disclosing proactively or just wait for the question to be asked and wait for the opportunity to present itself to disclose it? I mean, you disclosed it proactively, but just want to hear your thoughts on
so
it.
I think it really depends. It's something that is, it's still very private and confidential to a lot of people. So if I'm talking about, because I do recruitment, so a lot of some of the talents or candidates, they feel that by disclosing it early, they might affect their chances. But the truth is, it does not affect, right? But I think it's still there. So I think if you're comfortable and you don't mind, I think go ahead. But I think, it depends on individual and, whether they're okay to share private and confidential at the stage of the interview or even at the start of the job.
Did you disclose yourself?
I also feel that it's not a blanket yes or no. It has to be objectively assessed by each employee when considering opportunities in a new organization. I have always been comfortable sharing about it. For example, a few years ago when I was joining OCBC, I felt comfortable sharing about it in the interview process with my manager because I trusted her and I felt comfortable with the organization being progressive and so on. But I share it anyway as just part of owning my differences instead of hiding my differences. It just feels right. Having said that, my life stage is different. So, at this stage, I have a good foundation of family and friends and a stable career. So it doesn't bother me too much about any potential stigma or what people will think and so on. On the flip side, let's say there's a young, fresh graduate who's starting, right? I think they have to assess the situation and always consider a few points. For example, like how progressive is the organization? What do they think is the culture there? Is declaring about certain neurodivergent condition or being different in any significant way, is that going to essentially help them or not? Is it just, for example, for them to bring their whole self to work, or they actually need some support or accommodations, in which case maybe you want to consider that. And maybe a practical approach could be to say, don't declare it on day one, just assess how the workplace is and then make the move. So I think it is important to consider some of these. Our society is clearly progressing, but I don't think we are there yet where I can say everybody should be openly able to talk about something. But it's just the reality of the situation. For example, if I have injured my knee, I have no problem talking about it, right? I can say I have to go to a physiotherapist. But we do still have stigma to say I have, let's say, a mental health condition for which I need to see a therapist, then you would think twice. Right. So I think it's just some things that you have to take into factor how the work environment is and so on. But I definitely feel it is progressing a lot, and I see the signs are very positive.
Yeah, I fully agree, right? I think especially during COVID, accelerated a lot of things. And one of the things was mental health. We do get a lot of clients, talents just asking about, more mental health awareness, more papers on it, and really trying to understand what's happening.
So then in that case, right, let's say if a candidate comes to you and tells you they're neurodivergent, then how would you place them and how would you position them to clients?
So similar, right? To I think it's really understanding first. It's about the role, right? So I mean, when we hire for someone, typically it's based on experience, technical capabilities. Based on that, typically I personally work with a lot of the senior folks, so I do more senior level recruitment within the sales and marketing function. I think how I position it is they see things a bit differently, right? It will definitely benefit the team because if you have someone that sees things very creatively or differently, it creates a better team. It gives you a different outlook. So I think that is actually their, I would say superpower compared to others. So I would say that's how I position it. But then again, that being said, it really depends on the company, the hiring manager, and the role itself. I think that is first, that is that. And then the next part will be that. I will not include it for the sake of including it. But I think if the candidate or the talent is open to share, then I will share.
Sure. And what we're clearly seeing here is that it's not a perfect yes or no, that even though we want the ideal to be that there's a supportive organization that you can have an open conversation about, but sometimes there are other priorities and they're competing priorities basically, which is something we're hopefully making progress on. And on that point about progress, Himanshu, you mentioned that there's growing interest from employers to understand the condition, engage. Where do you think that's coming from?
I think both the fact that you have, like I mentioned, there's more leaders stepping up and talking about things. If you also see in the general, the zeitgeist, the times we live in, there's just a lot more conversation about it. You have like athletes who are stepping up and talking about the mental health struggles and saying, no, I'm going to actually not take part in the Olympics because I need to focus on this and so on. So when people in the spotlight, who we consider as hot leaders and so on, start talking about this, it definitely creates an aspect that needs to be paid attention to. The other side is that the employees themselves, because of more awareness, are actually raising concerns to say, I need support, or can we have conversations around this? So there is also a demand, especially in the next generation of employees or people that we're hiring. There is higher awareness or willingness to talk about some of these things. So it makes I wouldn't say necessarily just the HR, it makes the organization pay attention to it. And as a result, then they want to organize sessions. So I was just mentioning to say how we do these awareness talks. And so Unlocking ADHD is a mental health charity focused on awareness as well as advocacy and support. And a lot of what we do, sometimes I participate in these corporate talks where people are genuinely interested, not just about ADHD. We may partner with, for example, DAS for dyslexia, Autism Resource Center for Autism, but just to get awareness of the situation that many people or their families may be facing is something that is being asked for more and more. Its willingness to talk about it, I think, just continues to grow and grow in Singapore.
So these are very promising signs, but just to temper it with some of the flip side, I was just wondering, have either of you faced anyone dismissing your condition, calling it an excuse or implying it's an excuse rather than something real?
I can go first. I'll say my parents when I was younger. They always say, hey, you're just a mischievous boy that's trying to run away from homework. No, I'm joking, right? Essentially, the minute DAS said I'm dyslexic, my parents went to, buy, I think, 8 or 10 different books about it and how they can really help me. So they went a long way. I would say actually not really. When my friends, actually just last week, when my friends found out I was doing a podcast and then they were asking me, oh, Rumi, I didn't know you're dyslexic, and they were just similar, right? They just wanted to hear more and really understand more about what I'm facing. And one of them even asked Rumi, because I shared with him that sometimes numbers I just see repeat or double or, I just misread numbers. He said, hey, what about if you see, instead of numerals, you look at Roman numerals? Do you think that will help, right? Okay, because it's just more of I think they are really trying to understand how we see things and how differently. Yeah, but so far, nothing, I would say, negative.
Yeah, I think like what Ruby said, maybe your friends didn't know that you're dyslexic, and that's important that these traits shouldn't become identity, right? People shouldn't be to say, okay, oh, Himanshu, yeah, he has ADHD. No, that shouldn't be the case at all. And it is as such important that we don't make these conditions as an excuse also ourselves. They are explanations for certain conditions. It gives us a sense of agency to say, okay, I have this condition and there's all this scientific knowledge and proven things that help me in such conditions, and let's explore that. So I think that's quite important. In my own experience, it's a bit different because I was diagnosed much later in life. I haven't really heard or seen people treating it as an excuse. Somebody did call me out on the same example that I don't read very well and I've never read a full book in my life. So academics were a struggle and so on. But just shortly after I was diagnosed with ADHD, one of my close friends said, so what excuse have you been giving yourself to not listen to audiobooks? They've been around for a while. And I was like, yeah, I think that's an excuse I am using myself. So I think to me, I'm more careful of making sure I don't use things as an excuse. So after that, at the tender age of 37, I listened to the first full book in my life. And since then, I have listened to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts and so on. And it's quite awesome because they're a good source of learning. So in my experience, I don't see people calling it out as an excuse. But what I do see in the community, ADHD community, I hear of many cases where it does happen the other way as well. And people might be calling it out. But I think that's where it's also important to say, are we somewhere not being careful and using our conditions as an excuse? Or the people are not aware, and as such, we can help them bridge the gap in terms of awareness and so on. Or get them to participate in a talk or forward them a video, or there's all these things that are available right now. So that is where actually sometimes we get involved in unlocking ADHD as well, especially with family members, to build awareness. And we have certain, materials and so on that we prepared. Similarly, to actually let your close ones know and understand your conditions better, instead of just saying, no, you're lazy or you have this other attitude issues. When we can use science to explain things, it sometimes helps to get rid of those labels where people say it's an excuse. So we have to be careful of it both ways.
Yes.
We don't use it as an excuse. And when people say this condition is an excuse, we can engage them. And it's not a perfect world, so this will happen. But we can engage them with a lot of stuff that's available today.
And this is a very important point, actually, because if you look at the research, for example, at least for ADHD specifically, I'm not sure for other conditions, I think there's been a lot of discourse that has been over-medicalized and over-diagnosed in places like the US. I really like that point you touched on. I think that applies across the board to neurodivergence, and I think that's the balance that we have to deal with. I also, the audiobook example completely relate to it as well, because funnily enough, I can't finish a book as well. And so the way I found that to force myself to do it, that comes with this line of work, is what I've been doing is to ask my colleagues in the lifestyle section if they have any books up for review and volunteer to do the book review. And then I know there's a deadline. I have to write the review. So I guess it's about creating the incentive. So because we have all this knowledge about the respective conditions, and then from there, you can therefore find sort of mechanisms or little things or little habits, right, that kind of nudge you just the right way within these sort of, I wouldn't call it constraints, but, within these differences. So I think this touches on just the last question I have for both of you today, is that, there has been a push by some commentators to call neurodivergence a superpower. Do you think, kind of calling it the sort of superpower, giving it that sort of glorifying kind of label to it, right? Is it helpful or is it actually counterproductive in the long run? Just wanted to hear your takes on it.
I can go first. For me, it's not a superpower. I was thinking, earlier when you shared superpower, I feel that I bring maybe dyslexic people do have a certain way of thinking. So, example is that, if let's say 50 people are thinking of a solution, for them it's, in the box. And for me, I think of a solution that's out of box. For them, it's an out-of-box solution, but for me, it's in-the-box solution. So it's basically, where do I stand? So it's more of, let's say they're in the box, I'm out of the box, but for me, I'm in the box and they're out of the box. So I think it's that way. So I think that's one. A second thing, I think, is empathy, right? All of us with a certain condition is we went through, I would say, a tough period certain times in our life, right? So I think the superpower I would say we have is, many a times we do empathize a lot with a lot of situation and people. So, I think that's something that I want to share. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar view as like excuses is not one way or the other. And also each individual is different. And back to the point, again, neurodivergence is just a trait. It doesn't define us. So cannot be suddenly that gives us a superpower in a way. So, and any trait goes with its strengths and challenges. Personally, I don't like the term superpower, but like Hong Yi's example, I also have the kind of ability to hyperfocus and get a dopamine burst when you have these time-sensitive moments and deadlines, for example. Yet my brain also struggles with day-to-day tasks, which require more, I would say, drip-feed dopamine, for example.
Yes.
Now, in both cases, compared to a neurotypical brain, I am different. But it doesn't make me super or subhuman, right? It just makes me different. So that's how I think of it, to say that essentially these conditions just make us different. For some people, the way it makes us different helps, and some people it impedes us a bit more. But that's about it. It just makes us different. And then we have to figure out, using a lot of tools, and we're talking about like routines and habits and mechanisms and even medication, if it comes to it, if that's the right answer, that can help us to deal with this. And beyond it, I don't think it itself makes our identity. So superpower again implies as if like we are superhuman, and I don't necessarily
and it
believe in
reduces us down to the traits as well. And I think that is such much needed nuance in this conversation. When I just read, I'm glad that we are able to flesh out this conversation through our personal experiences to show that there are two sides to the coin. But this is a note, by the way, for our dear listeners, wherever you're listening to this show from. Our experiences of all three of us represent a slice of the neurodivergent experience. We hope that it would be illustrative and useful for aiding understanding, but we do not claim to be able to represent the full spectrum of experience, although there will be some overarching similarities in issues such as surrounding representation and support that transcend the specific ways in which a condition presents itself. And on that note, this is the 10th episode of Headstart on Record. I'm Tay Hong Yi. And if you have further questions about the whats and whys of neurodivergence, especially in the workplace, but also beyond, do reach out to me, as well as the wider Headstart team. If you'd like to read my articles at the Headstart newsletter or find me on LinkedIn, all these links are in our podcast show notes. This podcast episode is edited by Amiru Karim. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening. Do note, all analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast are for general information purposes only and are not intended to be relied upon as financial advice. You should not rely on them in making any decision. Please consult a fully qualified financial advisor or professional expert for independent advice and verification. To the fullest extent permitted by law, SPH Media shall not be liable for any loss arising from the use of or reliance on any analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast. SPH Media accepts no responsibility or liability whatsoever that may result or arise from the products, services, or information of any third parties. All opinions expressed by participants in this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of SPH Media.